There's just this escalation of injuries, and there has been tons of research out there, and the information is much stronger for strength in terms of prevention of injury than it is for movement mechanics.
Hey, this is More Than Velocity with Jordan Oseguera, Ryan Crotin, and I'm Bart Pear. And today we're going to go through a recent blog post that's up on armcare.com discussing kind of strength versus biomechanics. So we all know there's an injury problem in baseball. It's kind of on the rise, and where people are looking for the solutions may not be the optimum way to address this problem. And so this article kind of discusses that, looks at some mechanics issues and where strength comes in, and what might be your best bet to prevent injury going forward. So Ryan, you're the one who penned this article. So why don't you start? I'm actually gonna, as you're talking, I'm gonna share the screen. There's some good graphics on this article. If you want to check it out while we're talking, definitely run over to armcare.com, jump on the blog. And you'll see it. It's called Stop Focusing on Throwing Mechanics as a Way to Prevent Injury. And it'll be perfect to go along with that while we're talking. So Ryan, jump into it.
Sure. I mean, the basis of the article is that there are so many injuries that are occurring to the throwing elbow in baseball, and it's across all levels, whether it's at the youth level. There's good evidence to show that this is a big problem, and especially what we see at the professional level. And this year is one of the worst for overall for injuries. And there is a huge emphasis on addressing this problem with movement. And I'm a biomechanist, which is really interesting because you would think that my biases would be skewed towards we need better technology to address the throwing movement, to be able to look at the forces on the throwing arm or body position or posture. But the internal world, the strength side of things, understanding what are the tissues like, I believe is much more important to addressing this injury problem. And so that's why I believe that strength matters more. And I'll kind of let Jordan, give some impressions from a coaching position, and then I can talk a little bit more about mechanics behind this.
So from a coaching standpoint, again, that's my background. I've done 3D motion analysis and things like that. I understand there's a high level of importance on the way the human body is moving. But from my experience, again, over 15 years as a pitching coach, between pro ball, college, the private industry, things like that, the more you realize inconsistent movement is normally a strength issue. Usually a guy is just not strong enough to be able to handle the forces their body's creating, so it shows up in inconsistent stride angles, inconsistent arm paths, inconsistent kinematic sequence, all these big buzzwords that everyone's using now, and they're all great. There's nothing wrong with any of them. But the problem is when we try to attack a movement issue when it's really a strength problem, we're addressing the symptom, not the cause. And I would say for amateur athletics, probably 80%, maybe more, is going to be related to a lack of strength when it comes down to it. I might be jumping a little bit ahead on the talking points, so I apologize if I do. But I'm working with a guy right now remotely, and one of his big concerns is he's been to 5, 6, 7 different pitching coaches all in his local area. And, they're trying to get him to delay his torso rotation. We have to get you to delay this. We got to get you fix your kinematic sequence. And everyone knows how to address these things. And he's been spending a lot of money on trying to do this, and just, front side shoulder issue, just killing him all the time. We got him on the platform, gave him a quick test, and I said, listen, you're 19 years old, but you're pumping strength out like you're 14. So the reason that this is going on is you're just not strong enough. So we cut back throwing volumes. We used the system to kind of monitor what he was doing and just jacked up his strength big time. And then next thing you know, once we get him back on the mound, all of a sudden he's holding on to a good kinematic sequence for 55 to 70 pitches, as opposed to before he was running out of steam in the first inning. So his issue was not mechanics, because he would flash some really good kinematic sequences. He just couldn't do it for a long period of time.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. I think we'll definitely get into that. But I mean, Ryan, there's a title in this article that says throwing mechanics are mostly useless for assessing injury risk. You back that up. Tell me why. Tell me why you say that.
Well, they, there is a place for them, but when you're looking at an adult population, the fundamental mechanics are pretty much they're pretty much set. So yeah, in the article you can see there's been one study to look at pitching efficiency. So they're basically looking at the ability to throw at high velocities with the lowest torque values for the shoulder and elbow. And what they found, you'll see the green check marks, is that one, the lead hip leads the delivery, is a healthier delivery. The hand, when you're taking the ball out, is on top. The fingers are on top of the baseball rather than under the baseball. The elbows at shoulder height at foot contact. In the bottom structure, you can see the image that the shoulder is closed at foot contact, and the position of the foot is either in line or slightly in front of the back foot, so they're slightly closed to keep the body closed. Now, most pitchers, when they get to the adolescent level, they typically show this pattern, where now the mechanical changes are a little bit more impactful to evaluate with strength. At a higher level, it's the consistency in their movement, and that's why we need to be able to look at strength, because they'll compensate. At the youth level, I think mechanics are really important, because you need to be able to have these basic elements of movement. But, when you look at an adult pitcher, you're not seeing a pitcher take the ball out with their fingers under the ball usually. You're not seeing them kind of fall forward with their lead side of their shoulder, their hips usually leading. They're creating a lot more force. And so, our impression of what optimal mechanics are for an adult pitcher, that they, especially at the professional level, or the college level, they're pretty efficient. They're throwing really well. They're throwing really hard. And so these little nuances of change, they come from strength. And that's why I feel like, evaluating biomechanics constantly and trying to come up with this optimal delivery is not, I think, the best use of time in this immediate climate of health.
So obviously, there's some basic foundational, throwing mechanics that everyone needs, but you're saying optimizing it is a mistake if you have not looked at strength first.
Correct. It leads everything. When you talk about the injury progression, I have a little arm care IQ segment that I just put out in our first one. And, you're really trying to fight compensation. Whatever the pattern is, that however an athlete throws, you want to make sure that it's consistent, because if my arm position keeps changing because of fatigue, let's just say in my rotator cuff or my scapular stabilizers, my serratus, some of the muscles that help me put my arm in the right place, it's going to change some of the arm timing. It's definitely going to change the release position. So you could end up throwing more if you lose command and control. And it's that kind of thing, especially especially in athletes that are highly competitive, they need to be repeatable. There's a certain amount of variability that the body can handle, and then when it gets out of that range, it's a problem. And then it comes down to balancing throwing arm musculature that has to occur. And you can only do that with right now with dynamometry, and our app makes this available to do this constantly to make sure the strength is where it should be.
So let's talk about the inverted W. Why don't you guys quickly explain what it is in case someone doesn't know, and then the myths and truth around it.
I think the biggest thing we should point out is why don't they just call it the M? You
Yeah.
know, it's an M. You know, go on. That's my big complaint on it. Go ahead, Ryan.
Well,
Try to top that.
well, yeah. You could call it the inverted W. I guess you could call it the M. But in any event, it's essentially when the athlete's at foot flat, that the hand is below the elbow. So it's kind of it's underneath the elbow. It's not parallel. The hand's not above the elbow. And it can be equal in size. Like, some athletes have like a double internal rotation of their shoulder, so they're inverted on both sides. Or you could have one side that's up, one side that's down. There's a lot of different appearances to just having that arm position. And Jordan and I have talked about it a lot about, it might not particularly be an injury flag. We've looked at tons of pitching video, especially when we were with the Angels, and we would scale guys who would have their hand below their elbow, and we didn't see, a lot of injury detection there. And then looking at some research, they also don't see with that particular position to be more injurious than an athlete that has this clean, my arm is above my elbow and it's at least at 45 degrees of external rotation when I land, the arm's upwards, by comparison.
Yeah, you beat me to the punch on that because I know there's some research coming out now that it's not that big of a shock when it comes down to it. It's more about the timing of the rotation between pelvis and torso that matters where the arm is. You can land with a good quote unquote arm position, but if your pelvis and torso are rotating in a poor sequence of events, that's more dangerous than landing with your hand below and having your pelvis and torso rotate in a good sequence of events. The research is starting to find this stuff out. Me and you, like you said, been talking about this for years now, and it's starting to get kind of more into the public realm. And I still have someone that owes me money on a bet that I said for every one person that you find that gets hurt like this, you'll find two that get hurt like this. It turns out I was right. I need to actually collect on that bet. So.
All right. So we've been talking about strength being the most important. What I'm gonna share a graph we have on this blog that really talks about, put some numbers to the strength there. And Ryan, I just want you to talk about why it is the predictor when I share this here.
Yeah. So we're looking at this pie chart. So in developing this image, I've done a lot of research into what the evidence says about injury for the throwing arm. And it's very, a lot of people are aware in the industry that fatigue is the number one risk factor. And it's just like what I had talked about, is that fatigue causes weakness and weakness causes compensation. That's the strong connection, is that there's fatigue, there's weakness, there's compensation. And so there's just a lot more evidence that is related to these strength deficits and imbalances that cause these fatigue related injuries. And biomechanical flaws, just like what we talked about now, the inverted W obviously is something that is made mainstream about a position to avoid. And yet the research is showing that if that does happen for an athlete, there's not a great risk. Like what Jordan said, for every one guy who might be an inverted, or girl who might have inverted W, there might be two injuries. And then obviously workload is a big component. When you look at fatigue, one, is the athlete strong enough, especially to handle their workload? So that again affects the compensation. Workload is up there. In range of motion, there is some good evidence to talk about what can happen with restriction, or expansion of range, especially with weighted balls. If athletes are getting this huge layback that can increase the stress of the elbow. But overall, it doesn't matter how you move. If your strength can't support your movement, it can't accelerate, decelerate, have balance between the front side of the shoulder, the back side of the shoulder, or your flexor pronator mass isn't strong to support your elbow. It doesn't matter how you throw, you're at risk.
Yeah, to give a little more context on that as well, my first year coaching full time in pro bowl outside of just only a consulting role, I split time between, doing a little bit of a front office kind of evaluation scouting role as well as an on-field coaching role. And I remember at the end of spring training, they said, you've seen everyone in camp. Who do you like? I said, I like player A, player B, and player C. And I got laughed at. And they were like, there's nothing to like about these three guys. I said, they're going to pitch in the big leagues. And they said, okay, like, why? I said, well, they do these three things on occasion. They lock out their lead leg, that lead leg blocking that everyone calls it now. They show an occasionally really good kinematic sequence, and they do some stuff with their torso at ball release that really hard throwers do. So, well, why do they throw 86 to 89? I said, they're going to throw harder. You have to get them stronger. They're not strong enough to consistently do this. They laughed and they said, you know what? We were going to send him to double A. We'll send him to high A with you. Do whatever do what you want. I don't care. So I got him in high A, and then within about 8 weeks of just talking with the strength coach, talking with the AT at those levels, we had one of those guys hitting triple digits within 6 to 8 weeks. He went double A, triple A. The only reason he didn't get to the big leagues was obviously because of control of the player. Debuted in the big leagues in 2017. And then those other two players got to the big leagues in 2018. But they both started throwing, upper 90s, occasionally 100-mile-an-hour guys, within 6 months. And it was all a strength-based program. Obviously, one of those guys had really quick results. The other two guys took a little bit of time. But they're all three productive big leaguers that are still pitching in the big leagues right now. One of them just grabbed a hold. We just finished up the first half of the season, All-Star break starting today. But one of them just picked up a hold yesterday in the big leagues, and they're all still pitching. These are guys that I got laughed at because of how inconsistent they were. And we've tried so many, of the gurus, and everyone's come in and worked with these guys, and our best pitching coaches in the org have worked with them. And it was the athletic trainer that dialed in shoulder strength to allow these guys to handle the durability to be able to rotate and store that energy properly, as well as the strength coaches building lumbopelvic control to allow them to get more energy into the shoulder. So it was a combination of everything, but the amount of mechanics work we talked about probably took up less than 1% of the daily tasks. It was all strength. It was all durability.
So, back then you didn't have the arm care app. So how were you assessing strength, range of motion, or was it just
It was primitive.
Yeah.
I was like seeing how much of my hand I could fit under their scap. I was having them like flex their scaps and see which ones were, if they looked like they were lacking muscle back there. And I'd look at it and be like, yeah, these guys' shoulder strength, they borderline are just bones on the back.
Jordan there for a second. We lost you, Jordan, for a second.
Am I back?
You're back now.
You're back.
Yeah. The way I was doing it was a lot of, visual, comparing their left shoulder blade to their right. And again, it sounds primitive, but it works okay. You understand that maybe someone needs to build a little strength, boost things up here and there, checking the parity between biceps and triceps, and seeing how their scaps can actually retract and do all these things. But you're still kind of guessing when you don't put actual numbers and tangible data to it. And one thing I will say is, with me and Ryan actually implemented a system, again with another athletic trainer. His name was Andrew Hawkins, who we started messing with manual muscle testers, and we started increasing guys' velocities, getting them back from the aisle a lot quicker once we understood, does this guy need more front side, back side? Does he just need to be balanced? Is he equal? And then we need to build strength. Once we started putting more numbers to it, we really increased our rate of return on guys.
Awesome. Very cool. The final of that article is basically focusing on strength first. It's an excellent article. I encourage anybody to go check it out, to share it. If you got someone who doesn't listen to to podcasts and readings better, I would definitely get that and share it. It kind of goes into a little more detail than what we were talking about here, but I'm going to let you guys sum up the article at the end. What's the final takeaway, Ryan, I should have for this?
Yeah, the final takeaway is, we mentioned it before, is strength matters. Whatever you can do, build strength. It will support your mechanics and it will reduce your compensation factor and make you fatigue resistant.
A more durable arm.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Cool. Well, I think that's a good, excellent, quick podcast. Really hits home. Check out that blog post, and until next time.